Welcome everyone for being here. We're going to give it just 1 minute for folks to continue to come on in, but we thank you for being here today, and feel free to make comments, have questions in the chat, and we'll get started in just a few seconds. Okay. Welcome everyone to Notable's webinar series, Driving the Data-Driven Enterprise. For this episode, we have 3 talented guests joining us to share their insights and tips on bridging the gap between data creators and stakeholders. I'm very excited to see more about their approaches to connecting creators with stakeholders. So let's move right into introductions. Hello again, I'm Carol Willing, and I'm the VP of Engineering at Notable. For over a decade, I've been an active leader and developer in the Jupyter Notebook and Python communities, and my partner co-hosting today. Dave, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Dave Stewart. I'm Director of Product here at Notable. Prior to Notable, I spent 17 years at the National Security Agency, where I helped develop and evangelize the use of notebooks across the agency and in the U.S. intelligence community. With that, let's go right in and meet some of our guests here today. So Verl, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so hi, Verl Allen, CEO of Claravine. Been here for about 4 years at Claravine. We provide an enterprise solution around management of metadata and specifically selling to enterprise marketing organizations. Prior to Claravine, I spent 12 years leading strategy and M&A at Adobe on the marketing and experience cloud side of their business, and with a specific, very clear focus on analytics and measurement within the marketing organizations, the enterprise. Good to be here.
Great, Zoe, over to you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Hi, Zoe Hillenmeyer. I'm Chief Commercial Officer at Peak. Peak is a modern cloud AI platform focused on developing AI applications at scale. So we really focus on translating not only like the development of AI models, but actually translating that into business value and commercial application. I joined Peak in January. Prior to that, I was at AWS, running our global specialist organization for artificial intelligence and machine learning, and spent a couple of years at IBM as part of the initial Watson group as well. So 10 years in the AI universe. So that's about, I think it makes me like a AI original or something.
Yeah, like the AI elder or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Brad, you want to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Carol, Dave. Nice to be joining you guys. Brad Wells from BryteBox. We're a marketing consultancy out of South Florida, and we offer retained services for companies that don't have the bandwidth to do it themselves, but have the product and service to offer the marketplace without much communications behind it. So that's our background. And before that, I've been an entrepreneur really since graduating from the University of Miami, many different startups through the years. And so my background is really in adopting technology and change management.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. And again, thanks for joining us here today for this webinar. Let's get right into the topic at hand, right? How do we bridge this gap between data creators and stakeholders? And so first things first, let's just try to define what those gaps are. And for that, Brad, I'll start with you for the first definition of what those gaps are.
Sure. Well, usually, there's going to be some people that have a more vested interest in understanding a certain bit of information, and then there's the people that need to be on the ground sort of collecting the information and everywhere in between. And so at each one of these touch points, there's going to be a gap. And my feeling is try to ask, from the other perspective, what's in it for me, for each stakeholder along the path, so that you can understand where gaps may be arising, between your stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. And because stakeholders, they don't all come in one shape and size. So it's often, a challenge to try and figure out who needs what, who wants what. Zoe, do you have any thoughts on sort of some of the gaps people see?
Yeah, well, all of my questions all of my answers are always going to come from the lens of like adopting one of the most advanced techniques in data, which is, machine learning. But I think there are a couple of gaps I see pretty consistently. If you start with like business teams or business stakeholders, one of the big gaps that I see is feeling a little bit excluded from the language and the conversation, and not necessarily feeling empowered around common terms that are used to talk about data. I think machine learning, for example, feels really intimidating to a lot of business stakeholders, but it's a very learnable technology. But it's not always explained in the most learnable way. And so there's often a gap between, I've met with business leaders who believe that AI and ML is only accessible if you are a giant enterprise with a huge data science team and you have all this time to do R&D. That might have been true 15 years ago, but it's certainly not true today. But it's difficult sometimes for them to feel empowered to know which technologies to use for which things. So that's a really common gap that I find that's on the business side. On the data side and the data practitioner side, I find that they often struggle because their stakeholders don't understand the challenges of data, aren't quite data literate. So the feedback and the requests and the asks aren't in the language of data, they're in a different language, which makes it sometimes difficult to action against for them. And they feel a little bit misunderstood. They might spend 5 days doing data hygiene and data cleanup so that they can do an analysis, and a business stakeholder wouldn't understand why it takes 5 days to clean up the data. And they're like, well, that's because you didn't put any of the data in correctly in the first place. That makes it harder for me.
You make a great point. And I think it's sort of understated how data works and how data looks. And Verl, I know you've got some thoughts on that and how it presents as a gap.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Zoe brought up, in the sense that you've got, sitting in the middle is you've got your owners of the data, or the data scientists, the data teams. Downstream from them historically has been the stakeholders who are either using that for reporting, visualization, optimization, or other uses. What's happening though is those stakeholders are also sitting upstream now. As more and more data is being collected at the application level, the challenge you have is, how do you take that data that's coming in what historically has been silos, bring it into a collective data set, and then have the ability to translate that between the teams? We think a lot of that starts with, creating a pipeline that has a, end in mind taxonomy and really kind of data standards embedded in that span the teams, the channels, the technologies that are at the point of collection. It's not all IT collecting data, or specifically, analytic solutions. It becomes point solutions. Every application that's SaaS-based is now sort of a point of collection of data. It's how do we synthesize that and use that? It all starts to us with a common language and a common understanding in the organization that it traditionally has not been there.
Yeah, I mean, you make really good points, and it's almost like we're in this global data ecosystem, because things can come from all over the world, from all different, points of sale terminals to huge banking computers. So, and then different data sets get combined. So it is a huge challenge. So talking about challenges, Dave, do we have something that you want to ask our guests to follow up on that?
No, absolutely. Yes. I mean, now that we kind of understand some of these, where these gaps exist, and Brad was touching on a little bit there at the end too, how do we optimize our processes and outcomes to help overcome these gaps? Because some of these could be technical, but some of these certainly could be cultural and, learning wise. So Zoe, if we can start with you here, because I think you really highlighted that, in many cases, it's just, a lack of understanding, lack of awareness that could be overcome easily, I imagine.
Yeah, I think it starts with kind of a commitment of all of us that are part of the data ecosystem to ensure that our technologies, our content, our materials, our way of interacting with the market is inclusive and collaborative and open. It doesn't need to be confusing or elitist or hypey. We can simplify things for people. There's something we focus a lot on at Peak is how do you do that at the technology layer, but then even into our marketing assets. We build our marketing assets such that they can be legible by a business stakeholder and a technical stakeholder, and they speak to both technical truth and business truth. And we take the work to bridge those things together and make it easier on teams that are looking to adopt. And then if you're somebody who's looking to do that adoption, I honestly think it comes back to taking a curiosity mindset, being interested, learning, asking questions. You don't have to know it all today, and it changes a lot really often. So those are I think there's a responsibility for those of us that are vendors in this space to build our technology and build our content in a way. And then I think for people who are adopters, I think so much of it comes down to having curiosity.
I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing because, in addition to that, the market is moving really fast in terms of the technology. So, it's not unusual that a year from now, you've got a very different set of tools and approaches. I wonder if, Verl, you have any ideas about how maybe somebody could go about that?
Yeah, I mean, and I see this all the time. So recently I was on a call with a very large Fortune 100 technology company, and also on the call was their media agency. And it was interesting to see them trying to align around, it was a large, very complicated spreadsheet they were using to kind of collaborate around data. The challenge is they were on version 135 of the spreadsheet. What fields were named were not what both sides thought they were named. It's getting to the point where there needs to be this common understanding that from the business side and from the technical side and the data side, that there are ways to talk about this. So this notion of marketing people talk about UTM parameters and talk about tracking codes and things that are relevant to them and the data they're collecting and the problems they're solving. On the data side, they're talking about schemas and taxonomies, and they're talking about the same thing, but they talk about it very differently. And so there has to be a way to bridge that language barrier, but not just at the high level, but specifically down at the data level. And we believe it all starts kind of with enabling organizations to really standardize on taxonomies or that standardization of the data language, if you want to call it that exists not just within a specific feed of data, but across all the different feeds that may either now or in the future be utilized together in a single set of analysis or a model like what Zoe may be doing.
Yeah, I mean, taxonomies are super important. I know I went through an exercise about a year ago trying to do a taxonomy of the data lifecycle in Python, R, and Julia. It was probably one of the hardest things I ever tried to do. And I thought, why am I doing this on a webinar? But Brad, I know you've kind of come at data from like a global standpoint and, interacting with people. What do you see as some of the process issues?
Well, my other panelists really hit on some of these things already, so I'll really maybe go deeper on it. That curiosity that was mentioned earlier, yeah, it's very important, but you need to create a space that's safe to be curious, right? And so I think that's a big part of it. And the language that you're using and identifying the challenges you're going to have around language or around culture with different business units is really the key to it, right? Understand that you are in silos and just say, okay, cool, we're in silos. What's the problem? What are the things that you are scared of? What are the things that we can identify? Once you have those, it's a little bit easier to work through them. It's not some big unknown scary thing like, oh goodness, there's no way we can do machine learning. Well, what do you think machine learning is? Because it's going to vary between person to person, and getting a commonality and an understanding together on those things will just propel you further, right? And so that creates the culture of the curiosity that's allowed, and then it's an admission that you don't know everything and that you're definitely not going to communicate well together to start, but you can get better and you're going to go on this path together. And I think that's, from a management perspective, that's how I would really approach the cultural shift that's necessary to get these teams working and speaking the same language.
One thing I just want to bring up data silos, I think we historically think about data silos as, at least from a functional perspective, as teams across, like from a marketing organization channels, but silos exist not just horizontally. I think in the organization also exists vertically it's more and more the silos this way that are causing problems, because we're breaking down a lot of these horizontal silos. It's how do we start breaking down the silos between the business, the data people, the analysts? Those are the silos that still exist that have to be broken down.
Yeah, I mean, this is a fascinating topic because, in some ways it's like this big, huge network graph where all the silos are the nodes, and then the edges between things are the communication paths. And it's not an easy task. And I think it does require people to be intentional and curious and open-minded, while at the same time having like a taxonomy and like a flow in how you work together. So that probably leads us into our next question, Dave.
Yeah, it actually couldn't have led into our next question any better. So thanks so much, Verl, because really the next question is about collaboration here. And it really, like the point you made about, it's almost it's the vertical silos that are the more difficult silos now to collaborate across. So how can we talk about closing these gaps here if people in different roles across the data lifecycle are disconnected or unable to collaborate? So we'd love to hear from all the panelists and what the best practices that they've seen in the past that helps bridge that collaboration gap. And Brad, I'll start with you on this question.
Yeah, I think it's really just identifying where there isn't clarity and understanding where the dissonance is coming from. Taxonomy is one of those things where you're just like, okay, well, if you define a word differently than I do, we're going to have a problem moving forward. We need to be on the same page about these things. And there's many other forms of it, right? It could be like, I want to see the information displayed this way, and somebody else wants to display it in a different way. Well, why is there that dissonance? And I think having, like I was saying before, identified where there's points for dissonance, and then just coming up with like a shared of an understanding of what those things are will allow you to move forward much more smoothly and effectively.
Yeah, I mean, how we work together it's sort of a fascinating thing. And I think, Zoe, you probably have some thoughts about, how do you get your stakeholders to work together with the data folks?
Yeah, I think there's like two things here. One is like, how do you want to work internally? And I think one of the things, like one of the most common things that happens for me when I work with customers is I tell them who needs to be in the room to make it a success. This is a true story. Awesome customer, pretty data savvy, like pretty big global company that was looking to adopt some machine learning a couple of years ago. And they wanted to do some pretty interesting stuff in like demand forecasting. And I said, cool, okay, based on my experience, these are the 10 people that need to come to this workshop. Bring these 10 people, we'll do a workshop for 3 days. We'll build out some ML modeling. This is the data you need to bring into the workshop. On the other side, you're gonna have like an ML-based demand forecasting system. And first of all, they were like blown away that they could bring a bunch of people who weren't deep data science experts in 3 days to build out an ML model that would run a like global intelligence layer for them. But also, I got there that morning and none of them had ever met. They didn't know each other because they weren't used to working that way. And this is like very consistent now. So I've taken this as like one of the core things I do with customers. I'm like, these are the people you need to make this team a success. And oftentimes my talk track is like, well, there are certain roles of people who have access to data, people who understand how that, implementation happens and the value it creates when used correctly. But also I say, you're looking for a trait. You're looking for your most data curious business person, the person who's like interested in that data, who like asks that next type of question. Also looking for the most like commercially interested data people you have, like who is like taking just that extra beat to check in with the stakeholder. Bring those guys into a room, or gals or people into a room with us and we'll help you. Which actually brings me to my second point. So first is like construct teams correctly and construct them with what I call like kind of hybrid folks that like to dance between like different types of roles and find that really interesting. And the second is you don't have to do this alone and you don't have to start from scratch. There is like a huge community of people who freaking love this stuff and have spent I spent a decade learning about the best use cases for machine learning and AI in the world, which ones are hard, which ones are easy, which ones are medium, how to do it, how to think through it. Don't try to do it all on your own. That isn't it. You can do it directly with a vendor. You can be part of a community. If you're a data person, there's obviously tons of forums for builders. If you're business folks, there's conferences. Like, find some friends. Don't try to hack it all on your own inside, because the market does move too fast to do that. I mean, I do this full time. And I think the number one thing I give to customers when I meet with them, I say, look, first of all, I'm never going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you exactly where stuff is. And second, the market changes every single day. So what was hard a year ago is probably medium or easy today on some use cases. I'm like, let me be that resource.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. My daughter works as a Japanese English translator, and in many ways, what you and Brad have sort of communicated was, hey, we're trying to get people to work together. You sit sort of as the translator between groups. Verl, what makes it easier that you've seen to get people kind of talking in a way that they can both get their needs met?
Yeah, I mean, for us, a lot of this is, I think there are workflows that people talk about in the data. Like I think about it as there's, we talked about at the beginning, there are data creators, there are stakeholders. The reality is they're all part, I think people don't always think about it, they're all part of that ecosystem. And within that ecosystem, it's almost viewed as we have separate workflows for different parts of the organization. And because, I think, Zoe, you hit on, like, people have different needs and people have different understandings and ability to go to different depths of understanding on this stuff. And the more we can break down, again, not into individual workflows or individual silos, but start to connect those. And a lot of that starts with common understanding of what the outputs are we're trying to achieve. That then leads to more involvement on the business being part of the solving some of the downstream problems that historically they've not viewed themselves as a stakeholder in. It's we collected it, you guys deal with it downstream, and that's where a bunch of the ETL and a bunch of the delays in actually, we had one customer that it took them 3 months to do analysis across it was in their marketing, it was across a bunch of different channels as they brought the data together, because there was so much time cleaning up data. And by the time they got to the point where they're analyzing the data, it really wasn't relevant anymore. So it's how do you take that down to where it's less than a day? And some of that results, it's looking at those bottlenecks, and a lot of it was around data hygiene and data cleanup and ETL. If you can eliminate a lot of that upstream and have the business people be part of that solution rather than kind of contributing to the problem continually, I think that's a big part to clean up. But again, centralizing the workflows and standardizing the languages that they're using for data, and also more access to the data and more literacy around what we're trying to accomplish and what the data is and what data is valuable and what's not.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, I mean, you brought up a good point. Like, if you spend so much time collecting and cleaning, then by the time you use the data 3 months out, it's not relevant anymore. The whole market condition of the business could have changed in that time. I wish I had more time for many more questions. I think we could probably do like a whole nother webinar series just on this one particular question, but I know Dave's got at least one other question, I think.
Yeah, I guess one quick question here, just to kind of wrap it up for us, right, is just talking about, what are your all tips for, promoting a data-driven culture, right? And obviously we've touched on culture and the importance of, encouraging people to be curious and to learn and then all those sorts of things during this thing. And so we'd love to hear just like last recommendations here for people watching about what is that tip to encourage a data-driven culture. Brad, we'll start with you here on the last one.
Yeah, sure. Well, just start talking about data from the beginning, not from the end. And like Verl was saying, you need to know what outcome you're looking for in order to collect the data properly in the first place. And everybody needs to be brought along for that ride. So I think it's just, like, inform people early and often about the reasons that things are happening, have a common language and create the expectation that things are going to be better, not correct the first time or 100% right. You're always going to be improving. And I think that's what allows that curiosity and that culture of being data driven and running experiments and knowing that you're going to have a hypothesis, and the hypothesis may be slightly right, or really wrong. But the idea is to keep improving on that and having that open communication flow that all the stakeholders are really vested in that.
Yeah. Verl, you have any thoughts about what you think are the #1 tips for creating data-driven cultures?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is, for us, the way we think about it all the time is proactivity. Be proactive and solve. Because the problem is if there are problems in the data flows and there's problems in the data, it just compounds and gets more expensive as it moves through the system. So thinking about it as a system, being proactive to solve what you can up front. And I think the other one is involving more people than you probably think you need to in the process. Because the more through that value chain, you have engagement from people, the more they're going to understand what I'm doing here has an impact here. And and then you actually have ability to address some of the problems because there's a much better understanding of what happens and what the challenges are, the bottlenecks, and the uses through that value chain.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've seen people sometimes talk about it as like a DNA helix of you've got business owners and stakeholders there, and then you've got the data native folks here, and it's really how they come together that, and it's an iterative process. It's not just a one and done. Zoe, what tips do you have for us?
Well, me and my dog Beans, who's decided to join us. Here she is, ready to offer her best tips. Yeah, I think I think Brad and Verl both made great points. I guess the only thing I'd kind of layer onto that is like, you are a steward of the culture. So how do you ask questions? What do you present in meetings? How do you support and like accelerate those around you? I think it's like practicing a little bit of empathy, that for some people becoming data driven is a journey and they're at the beginning. So, I mean, I've been doing this for a really long time, but sometimes I'll work with folks that have never touched a database in their life, but their lives could be improved with data, or they're an input person into the data flow. And so you want to exercise that EQ, that empathy layer, to be like, hey, look, I know that you probably aren't a big data person, but like, here's why getting the data right could be really helpful for all of us. Like a year from now, we would be able to predict the impact of certain things that we do, or that you want us to invest in, better if we collected that data really well starting now. And then it'd be easier for us to fund that or to increase the size of the team or whatever. And you can bring people along on that journey with you. But the other piece is to try to make it as easy as possible on them. Like sometimes if you have some experience as a data leader, you can say, look, we won't get to all this data cleanup all right away. These are the 3 categories we're going to focus on first. And I'm going to take my time to make sure we get those really right, so you guys can learn how to do it for yourselves. Like, and then it filters in. So it's more of like leading by doing a little, in addition to, I think, what Brad and Verl said.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think we've had a lot of really good information about how to connect stakeholders and data creators. What's the best way for folks to contact each of you? We will be sending some stuff out after, but maybe you could just really briefly, starting with Zoe and then Verl and then Brad.
Yeah, sure. I am the only Zoe Hillenmeyer in the world, so I'm very easy to find. Extremely Googleable, for better and for worse. But you can find me on LinkedIn and reach out to me there. Also, Peak has offices in India, in England, as well as in the US. And we've got great teams of data scientists, data enthusiasts, folks that really focus on the commercial application of AI. So you can also just find us on the website, reach out if you're looking for somebody a little bit closer to home to catch up with and meet the team.
Awesome. Verl.
Like Zoe, there's not a lot of Verls out there. So either Google Verl Allen or same approach, LinkedIn, you'll find me. And if you're interested in what we're doing, check us out. It's claravine.com, and we're easy to find on the web.
Awesome. Brad, you want to take us home?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on social, on all of BryteBox's channels. Don't Google me, because my name is sort of common and you're going to get baseball players, musicians, and everybody else. But if you look for me on LinkedIn at Brad F. Wells, that's an easy way to find me.
Thank you so much. And on behalf of Dave, my co-host, and all of the Notable team, I really want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insights with us. And thank you to all the audience members that have joined us or listening to us later. We hope that all of you will join us for Notable's future webinars on driving the data-driven enterprise. Thank you so much, and everybody have a great week.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.